May 15th, 2006. New Super Mario Bros. Is released into the world. It was the first original 2D Mario game to release in over 13 years, and ushered in a brand new era for the series as a whole. The game's mechanical simplicity and ease of understanding guaranteed it would become one of the DS's biggest hits. Nintendo made note of the game's success, and churned out sequel after sequel in the span of 6 years, which left many fans feeling fatigued. All of these games had the same world progression, the same power-ups, the same plot setup, the same sanitized art style. Nothing about them felt new anymore, and people began to associate those grievances with 2D Mario as a gameplay style. You could even see this change in design philosophy manifest in the 3D Mario games of this time. Galaxy, and to an even greater extent, Galaxy 2, were the most linear games in the series up to this point. You pick your stage from a course select menu, platform through a pretty straightforward obstacle course, and grab your MacGuffin. All of the homogenization culminated in the release of Super Mario 3D Land for the 3DS. This game is essentially what the new 2D Mario games would play like in 3 dimensions, and for what it's worth, it does it well. In spite of the game's relatively positive reception, the announcement of Super Mario 3D World for the Wii U left many disappointed. And to be clear, the first 3D Mario on an HD console being a follow-up to the most bland and safe 3D Mario game yet was underwhelming. For many years, the legacy of 3D World had been that of a monotonous, uninteresting Mario game that didn't push the series forward in any meaningful way. The release of Super Mario Odyssey saw the return of gameplay conventions fans had been yearning for, basically the antithesis of everything 3D World was. The open sandbox levels that beckoned you to explore every nook and cranny, a robust movement system, and memorable locales present in the game gave people hope for the future for the first time in years. This, combined with the port of 3D World for the Nintendo Switch in 2021, which added new features and improvements to the game, prompted many people to reevaluate 3D World and come to a new, more favorable conclusion. The understanding that 3D World exists as simply a distinct style of 3D Mario spread, and more people were willing to accept 3D World as it is and not what it could have been. And that brings us to today. Personally, I've always felt that people were a bit too hard on this game, but I wasn't exactly its biggest fan either. Its levels were decent fun, but nothing about it resonated with me to the same extent that exploring Isle Delfino in Sunshine or reading Rosalina's origin story in Galaxy did. I put off making a video on this game because I wasn't even sure I'd have too much interesting to say about it, let alone see my perception change. A couple of weeks ago, I got a random urge to boot up the game for the first time in years, and figured I'd capture some footage just in case it could come in handy. I went in thinking I'd play a few levels and get bored pretty quickly, but I ended up playing all the way until World 3, and found myself looking forward to the next opportunity I'd have to play more. After 100% completing the game and replaying it further, I came away from it with not only a new perspective, but a message that I needed to hear in this stage of my life. I want to explore how that happened, why I think it is a more than worthy entry in the 3D Mario series, and what the game taught me about art as a whole. But first, Patreon. If you would like to support me monetarily, you can do so for as little as $1 a month. You'll get some cool perks in return, like your name in the end credits, early access to scripts, sneak peeks at future content, and my eternal gratitude. I just recently put up a video discussing my thoughts on every first-party Switch title thus far. Okay, without further ado, this is Super Mario 3D World.
Super Mario 3D World!
Mario and company are strolling around in the Mushroom Kingdom when they find a mysterious broken clear pipe. They fix it, and we see an unfamiliar figure pop out, a Sprixie princess. She informs the party that Bowser has kidnapped her friends, and suddenly, he pops out of the pipe and grabs her. The group chases after him, and they find themselves in a foreign land, the Sprixie Kingdom. Something I appreciate about this game taking place in somewhere other than the Mushroom Kingdom is that although the worlds generally adhere to traditional Mario theming, World 1 is the grass world, World 2 is the desert world, etc., each level is allowed to be whatever it wants. Take for example World 4. This world is supposed to be a mountain, or canyon, or something. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Either way, just one level in this world inherits the world's aesthetic. Ant Trooper Hill sees you bouncing across giant ants in a region that looks right at home on the world map. But then, The next level takes place in a poisonous swamp, the one after that brings back the beat blocks from Mario Galaxy in space, and later on, you climb through the ruins of a city inhabited by spikes. Contrast that with something like World 8 from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, where every level is just a different take on Fiery Volcano, and it's clear that the level themes in 3D World are a lot more inspired. Now, something I praise Sunshine for is that each stage feels distinct from the last, all while existing under the tropical island umbrella. It would have been really neat to have each stage in 3D World take similar cues, where each stage has its own unique setting and gimmick, but still fits in the broader environment. However, I cannot deny that the approach 3D World does take is effective in its own way. There's a remarkable sense of speed throughout the adventure. Even if you're not explicitly moving quickly, you'll likely find that you're flying through levels at an exquisite pace, and I think that each level being themed wildly different from the last only intensifies that feeling. Part of what makes this game feel so good to play are the controls. Like Galaxy, 3D World features a pretty stripped-back moveset, but it still affords the player greater overall control and mobility than that game did. For starters, Mario can only move in 8 directions. This ensures that your stick movements will be more accurate in tighter platforming sections, and especially in areas like this one on the pirate ship, where you'll be running on a narrow beam and performing tons of tight turns. It avoids the potential frustration of having full 360-degree movement throwing off your jump angle or something, and I think it's a great change that makes this style of 3D Mario the most fun it can be. 3D World also has this new sprint mechanic that hasn't been seen in Mario before or since this game's release. Mario games have allowed you to sprint since the beginning of time, but you simply had to hold down the button and it would activate immediately. In 3D World, you have to hold down the button and build up your momentum before the sprint modifier actually kicks in. I'm not quite sure why it works this way, but if I had to guess, the delay acts as a confirmation window of sorts. An unintentional press of the sprint button and its immediate activation could be enough to kill a player that's a little too close to the edge of a platform, and the Switch port's 40% increase to base movement speed heightens that possibility. Given that one of 3D World's primary missions was to introduce 3D Mario to as many new people as possible, I think this is an understandable decision to make. Standard moves like the wall jump, long jump, side somersault, spin jump, and ground pound return virtually unaltered, and they feel great here. The removal of the triple jump is disappointing, but we'll come back to why I think it was removed later. The Switch port added a new dive roll move from Mario Odyssey, which allows for easier recovery when you miscalculate a jump, or serve as a utility for getting up to some hard-to-reach platforms. Another thing from Mario Odyssey that the Switch port brought with it is the ability to ground pound jump, which is a useful feature for grabbing some items, and in certain cases can completely trivialize certain challenges, depending on the character you're using. That's another thing that 3D World brings new to the table, the ability to play as multiple characters. The Galaxy games toyed with this idea, allowing you to play as Luigi on occasion, who had a significantly greater jump height and running speed than Mario at the cost of being more slippery. But these differences never amounted to any kind of meaningful change in how you engage with the game's levels. 3D World goes all out on this idea. Each character has their own attribute that distinguishes them from the others, to the point that you'll want to carefully consider who you choose to play certain levels as. Mario is the jack of all trades. He's got a decent running speed and jump height, but nothing more. He's a safe pick for pretty much every level. Luigi has the highest jump in the game, which makes him a great choice for hunting down collectibles. Princess Peach is very slow, but she has the ability to glide through the air for a couple of seconds, which is extremely helpful. Toad is by far the fastest out of the group, but his jump is pathetic. Still, he's got his uses, and he's a fun character to play as on repeat playthroughs for an added challenge. Finally, Rosalina is a secret unlockable character that can be gotten in one of the special worlds. She plays similarly to Peach, but instead of gliding, she's got the spin attack move that Mario had in Galaxy. This move has a variety of applications, which kind of places Rosalina in the all-arounder camp with Mario to me. I don't think we could have asked for a cooler secret 5th character, and I think she rounds out the roster beautifully. What I love about this format is that these characters and their unique attributes are basically latent movement options. People often levy criticism at the more linear Mario games for being so restrictive, and I've argued why I think that contributed positively to the Mario Galaxy games in my other videos, but I was always puzzled when I heard that as a point against 3D World. We have to draw a line at some point, or else players will be flying through levels in 20 seconds and completely bypass any engagement with the level design. I think the base moveset in 3D World is exquisitely fine-tuned to achieve a perfect balance of fluidity and player expression, while also ensuring that levels aren't made too easy by that level of control. The playable characters are just the cherry on top. There's an opportunity cost to every character you pick. If you pick Toad, you'll be missing out on Peach's glide ability or Luigi's extra jump height, and vice versa. It reminds me of what Sunshine did with Flood's nozzles, where picking one up locked you out of the hover nozzle, but executed in a much more intuitive and less frustrating way. But still, the system affords you the ability to play the way you want to, which is seldom achieved in Mario games. For that reason, I think you could make a strong argument that 3D World is the best controlling Mario game thus far. On top of that, the levels themselves are unprecedented explosions of creativity. Each level picks a unique gimmick to focus on, and proceeds to flesh it out throughout its runtime. The levels are ultimately the beating heart of this game, so if you don't mind, I'd like to take you through a tour of some of my favorites. Ant Trooper Hill, which I mentioned earlier, begins by presenting the ants as obstacles to be avoided, but then you find the stamp, which asks you to use the ants as bounce pads to obtain, unless you have the cat suit, that is. The level expands on this concept shortly after, where the exit is across a long stretch of dangerous spikes, and the only way to make it across is to continuously bounce on a gigantic ant as it crawls. It's not exactly mind-blowing, but I found it to be a neat little subversion, and the theming of the level being on point makes it one of my favorites in the game. Mountain Must Dash is a level that pays homage to Mario Kart, more specifically, Super Mario Kart. I think singling out Super was a great choice, as the blocky nature of that game and its tracks can be translated very faithfully into 3D World's visual style, which is also colorful and blocky. This stage even manages to achieve the same thrill you get drifting around on a Mario Kart track through the use of boost pads and frequent obstacles to overcome. In multiplayer, you feel a natural urge to race against your friends and be the first to the flagpole, which can make for some chaos. Overall, this is a great level, and its short length ensures that it can be replayed endlessly without feeling dull. Honeycomb Starway is an example of 3D World's unique applications of its static camera system. It's one of the few levels in the game that is viewed entirely from a top-down perspective, and it uses this to call back to arcade space shooter games like Galaga or Space Invaders. Auto-scroller levels tend to get shit from a lot of fans, but I can't imagine this level playing any other way. You use the boomerang flower to shoot bugs as they fly into your view, and also grab the stars that are just out of reach with your normal moveset. Later on, it asks you to maintain a double cherry, which is a tall order given how challenging it can get. This level manages to perfectly mix platforming with shooting, and it makes for one of the most creative ideas I've seen in a Mario game. Cakewalk Flip utilizes the flip switches from Mario Galaxy, only here, the catch is that they flip when you jump instead of spin. What's cool about this level is that there are these enemies that shoot laser beams outward periodically, and in order to avoid them, you'll want to jump. You'll have to think about how the platforms will change for each and every jump, and one wrong move will send you back to the start. Things get interesting when you have to preserve your double cherry power-up throughout the course of the level, especially when going for this green star that asks you to pick up 8 green coins, which can be difficult if you don't have a plan. It's really cool to see a level make you think about something as simple as jumping in these games, and I love it purely for that concept. The double cherry is probably my favorite addition to 3D Mario that this game brings with it. What the double cherry does is create an exact clone of your character that mirrors your every move. This clone will eat a hit of damage and disappear at no further cost to you, but your main priority should be keeping it alive. Whenever this power-up shows up in a level, you will have to hold on to it to grab a collectible later on in the level. Instead of feeling the confidence that a power-up typically affords you in Mario, you will be on edge until you grab that coveted item. A great example of this in action is Beat Block Skyway. This level features block-shaped platforms that alternate to the beat of the music, a direct callback to a stage in Mario Galaxy 2, which is awesome. At the end of the stage, there's a long slide that asks you to slide left and right to avoid falling into the endless abyss, and at the bottom, there are 2 pressure plates gating a green star. This is easy enough to do with just one player, but having to maintain clones the entire way down is a nightmare. The clones land at different heights on the slide, so it's very easy for them to get separated and virtually guarantee their deaths. The way that the double cherry makes the game simultaneously easier and more difficult is something I commend the designers for, and I'd love to see more power-ups like it in the future. Another level that effectively integrates a power-up's unique abilities within its design is Chain Link Charge. This stage features the cat suit, and it asks you to primarily jump between these chain link fences to reach the next platform. The catch is that this level is an auto-scroller, so you'll have to balance proper timing with speed, and this is where the catsuit comes into play. This power-up has a dive move that gives you a burst of speed and prolongs your airtime, making it a perfect fit for this level. If you mistime a jump and end up hitting the chain link fence, provided you have the catsuit, you'll just climb up it and have another shot at jumping. This climbing ability also comes in handy later on in the level, where you'll need to be able to climb walls and send this platform upward in order to grab some collectibles. On the polar opposite end of Chain Link Charge, Snowball Park is another favorite level of mine, and not for any mechanical reason really. For a 3D world level, its vibes are surprisingly infectious. It really hones in on that winter wonderland feeling, and nothing about this level conveys that better than the music. This is a good time to mention that this game's soundtrack is genuinely incredible. It mostly consists of big band jazz tracks that lend 3D World a distinct identity. Many songs feature instruments like saxophones and trumpets, which still remains unique in the franchise to this day. In contrast to the Galaxy game's focus on atmosphere, these songs were composed to convey the faster pace of 3D World. Beat Block Skyway, which I brought up earlier, contains probably my favorite track in the game for that reason. It finds a perfect balance between the quaint atmosphere of space and the urgency that the level design desperately wants to instill in the player. Double Cherry Pass is another shining example of this game's fantastic soundtrack. This level doesn't have a lot going on in terms of obstacles to overcome, as it serves as the player's introduction to the Double Cherry power-up, but it completely makes up for that by housing this banger. I absolutely love how it is simultaneously elegant and playful. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in a Mario game. I can't in good conscience bring up departures from Mario norms without discussing Hands-On Hall. This is one of the most iconic levels in this game, and for good reason. It's themed after a traditional Japanese dojo, and you spend the bulk of the level walking through hallways with various obstacles and objects to engage with. I love how progressing frequently requires you to hit a gong or fold the wall. It sells the atmosphere in a way that few levels in the game even attempt. The Great Gulp Hole is another stage that subverts typical Mario tropes in an interesting way. Upon entering this level, you'll see what appears to be the very end of the stage right in front of you. But walk up to the flag and it'll start flying away. You'll have to chase it down through a linear obstacle course and grab onto it in under 100 seconds. The catch is that you'll want to find a balance between speed and caution, assuming you're going for all the collectibles. If you grab onto the pole too early, you'll miss your chance at grabbing the stars later on in the level, but you might also be too slow to catch up to the flag in time. This is one of the most memorable stages in the game for me, and it's one I always look forward to replaying. I could go on and on about the best stages 3D World has to offer, but this video would be way too long. Here are a few more great ones I don't have quite as much to say about, but wanted to mention anyway, just because I think they contain worthy design concepts. Shadowplay Alley. This level plays with lighting and perspective in some cool ways, and it makes for one of the most visually intriguing levels in the game. I particularly enjoy grabbing the collectibles in this stage, as they're some of the most memorable in the entire game, especially the Captain Toad one at the end. Fuzzy Time Mine. You've got to ascend this tower with fuzzies chasing you, turning the level into an auto-scroller. It's frantic, and it doesn't go on for too long, so it's a fun rush of adrenaline. It's rare to see vertical auto-scrollers in Mario, but this level does it well because of how it contextualizes said scrolling. Spiky Spike Bridge. Everything about this level feels oppressive, from the aesthetic to the core premise. You constantly have to readjust to the timing of the spikes to avoid taking damage, and this level appears right around when the difficulty starts ramping up. It's definitely on the more simplistic side, but it does quite a bit with that simplicity. If there is one problem with 3D World's fast pace and its absurd onslaught of creative level ideas, it's that it can become a bit overbearing. You're jumping from stage to stage fast, and it can be hard to remember all of what you've just played. I suppose the Switch port's speed increase is a double-edged sword in that regard, as that allows you to fly through levels even quicker. One of my friends tried to describe a certain level to me, and I couldn't for the life of me remember what he was talking about until like the third time he tried to explain it. However, the game rectifies this partially in the secret worlds at the end of the game, as it brings back many familiar levels and remixes them to be far more difficult. For example, Blast Block Skyway is a more difficult version of Beat Block Skyway, where the blocks alternate 4 times as fast as they did in the original level. Switch Shock Circus features far more enemies, and more dangerous ones at that, than the first circus level. Piranha Creeper Creek After Dark, as the name implies, is a dark version of the original stage, and this does quite a lot to make the level harder, as platforms and enemies will be less visible, and assuming you have the Fire Flower, you'll have to balance lighting up the room with avoiding taking damage and destroying the enemies in your path. Most of the major levels see a revisitation in these later worlds with some new idea, and I think it's exactly what the game needed in order to remain fresh and engaging right up until the end. And then, there's Champions Road, which is my favorite level in the game. For my money, this is the most difficult 3D Mario level to date, but yet it never really gets frustrating. This level is the culmination of everything you've learned in the game, one final test. Something I love about this stage is how the pace of it gradually ramps up. You start off in this outer space area reminiscent of Mario Galaxy, where you'll have to wait around for these platforms to move into the correct spots. Then, you'll have to sprint across these beams and avoid the chucks in the process. The beat blocks in the next area push you to cross them even faster. This vertical section asks you to bounce on these ants and piranha plants up to the top without any room for error, all the way up to the end of the level, where you'll be blazing through an absurd amount of lasers on these dash panels. No single challenge in this level is all that difficult. It's just the sheer amount of stuff this level throws at you and expects you to clear in one go that makes it so tricky, and as a result, incredibly rewarding to clear. It's a terrific finale, and it makes 100%ing the game well worth the effort. Speaking of 100% completion, perhaps the most enjoyable part of 3D World for me is hunting for collectibles. The majority of stages contain 3 green stars and a stamp, and you'll need to gather a good chunk of green stars in order to clear the game. These items are typically hidden behind challenges, secret rooms, or off-screen areas that require out-of-the-box thinking. None of these collectibles are particularly difficult to find, but yet I still felt motivated to grab each and every one of them. I really enjoyed discovering how the devs managed to hide the MacGuffins within these very linear levels, and surprisingly, you never get the sense that they ran out of ideas at any point. In a game where you're mostly following a straight line of obstacles, it's fun to go off the beaten path and poke around. Being rewarded with meaningful items is a great way to ensure that players will always be motivated to do so. Part of what makes hunting these things down so enjoyable is that they never slow down the pace of the level. In a game like Galaxy 2, grabbing the hidden star would boot you out of the stage and take you back to the world map. Or perhaps for a more apt comparison, the blue coins in Sunshine prompt you with the save screen after picking one up. In 3D World, you simply walk up to a green star and get a move on. If you do find yourself having to enter a secret room, you won't be spending any more than about 30 seconds in said room, and then you're right back in the main level. Therefore, discovering every collectible in a level on your first run through is a very easily attainable goal. There are times where you will be forced to replay a level to grab everything it contains, disregarding times where you just miss the location of a collectible, which is pretty lame. For example, Plessie's Plunging Falls' second green star is found behind this waterfall, and going through it prevents you from grabbing the stamp, since you have to skip the section that contains it. This one isn't the biggest deal because you'll likely go for the stamp first and have to really hunt for the second green star anyway, but it's always bothered me on repeat playthroughs. However, a far more offensive example are these character-specific buttons found in various levels. When you hop into Rolling Ride Run, you'll make your way up to the end of the level, only to find out that you can't activate the button that grants the stamp unless you're playing as Rosalina. That means you'll have to play the level all over again if you're going for full completion. On one hand, you could argue that these switches were implemented to encourage experimentation with other characters instead of sticking to one you really like, but I think the various hiding spots and challenges that these collectibles ask you to engage with already do a perfectly fine job of that. Furthermore, there's no way of knowing what character you'll need beforehand. so these come across kind of lazy. I wouldn't be harping on this so much if it were not for this game's incredible pacing, because they've always stuck out like a sore thumb to me. Of course, there are other methods of obtaining green stars in particular, and they are some of my favorite moments in the game. There are these occasional levels that have you play as Captain Toad in order to collect 5 green stars, and they're a huge departure from the typical 3D World gameplay. Playing as Captain Toad modifies the fundamental rules of 3D World, which always makes for a welcome change of pace. For one, you can't jump at all, and second, you can't obtain any ability-altering power-ups. This means that in order to navigate these stages, Toad will have to manipulate the environment around him. These levels end up feeling more like puzzle boxes than platforming challenges, and that's perfectly alright with me. The other way you'll be finding green stars is completing these mystery box challenge gauntlets. You'll be placed in a room where you have 10 seconds to kill all the enemies or complete a random challenge. Doing so successfully will reward you with a green star and take you into the next room, where the cycle repeats until you clear the entire stage. These gauntlets start off simple at the beginning of the game, but slowly evolve to be longer and have more involved challenges. They coalesce in the final world of the game, a 30-room long level where you cannot mess up a single time. This is another one of my favorite stages in the entire game. You could arguably say it delves into roguelite territory with how devastating a death can be in this level. Finally nabbing that 30th green star is one of the most euphoric moments I've had playing a Mario game. And hey, if they wanted to fully embrace the roguelite design in a future game, I certainly wouldn't be opposed. 3D World is the first 3D Mario to feature simultaneous 4-player multiplayer, which was arguably the game's main selling point, and I think informed a lot of the design choices this game makes. This was a facet of the game I was never able to experience until the addition of online multiplayer to the Switch port, and has played a role in changing my perspective on 3D World. And now that I've experienced it for myself, I have quite a bit to say. In the early stages of Super Mario 64's development, a 2-player mode had been planned and worked on for the game, but was ultimately scrapped due to the hardware limitations of the Nintendo 64. In an Iwata-esque interview with the head developers of 3D World, Yoshiaki Koizumi was asked about regrets related to the development of Super Mario Galaxy.
One goes all the way back to Super Mario 64. When we made the first prototype, Mario and Luigi were on a flat field. Because of hardware limitations, we had a choice between cutting Luigi or making more elaborate landforms. Then, in tears, we had to ask Luigi to leave.
Koizumi goes on to say that he was able to rectify this in 3D World. I believe that the desire to create a multiplayer 3D Mario experience was at the heart of the decision to model this game after the 2D Mario games. Koizumi stated in this same interview that he believed the 2D Mario games were easier for the greatest number of people to understand, and they wanted to explore the concepts they had just developed in 3D Land even further. A game comprised of linear levels also simplifies the issue of camera control when multiple players are moving around. There are far fewer potential camera angles to account for than something like Super Mario Sunshine, and having to deal with multiple characters exploring a vast stage would prove difficult for the designers. So when we look at it that way, the decision to double down on this linear design makes total sense. Given everything I just stated, you might be surprised to learn that playing Super Mario 3D World with 3 or more players drastically changes how you engage with the game in ways I never could have expected. Switchboard Falls is a pretty straightforward level when you're playing on your own. Standing on the right side of the board will make it travel rightward, and standing on the left will send it leftward. None of the obstacles are too difficult, and all you've really got to do is properly time a few jumps at the end. In multiplayer, I loathe this stage. One player jumping on a board will begin moving it, leaving everybody else stranded or dying due to missing their jump. And even if you do get everyone on the same board somehow, you'll have to contend with the obstacles in your path, which will likely shuffle everybody's placement on the board, which has the potential to stop the board's movement or completely reverse the direction it's going in. You and your crew have to be extremely careful and calculate exactly how your movements will impact the broader stage, or you won't have a prayer of beating this level in a timely manner. Puff Prod Peaks was a level that was originally meant to justify a lot of the Wii U gamepad's tech. Blowing on the microphone would move the platforms, and certain obstacles require you to activate them via the touchscreen. There's this one section where you have to scale a giant wall using nothing but these touch-activated blocks, and it's simple enough to do on your own, but in multiplayer, ensuring that everybody makes it to the top is near impossible. Oftentimes, these blocks will bar others from following the path you make for yourself when you activate them, forcing them to wait. But that can be dangerous, as this section is just tall enough to kill any player who isn't on screen for a few seconds. There's also Cakewalk Flip, which I discussed briefly. You remember those flip panels I talked about? Yeah, those will trigger whenever anybody jumps. That makes scaling this wall right here a real pain in the ass with friends. Once again, the wall is high enough to kill anybody who is left down too low, and that can make knowing where to jump quite difficult. Basically every level in the game has some obstacle that is a completely different beast in multiplayer, and you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. You get the same thrill you would get from playing something like Mario Kart Wii or Mario Party because of how bullshit the game can be sometimes, which is fitting, because in multiplayer, 3D World feels more like a party game than a platforming adventure at times. 3D World is the first 3D game in the Mario series to feature a scoring system akin to the older 2D titles, and to my knowledge, it's the only game where the score matters, at least somewhat. You'll get points for defeating enemies, nabbing MacGuffins, and landing on the flagpole at the end of the level. After completing the level, every player's overall score is tallied up, and whoever accumulated the highest number of points is awarded a crown. This crown is visible on your character in every subsequent level, as long as you maintain it. However, other players have the ability to pick up the crown for themselves. If you take damage while wearing the crown, or even have another player ground pound your head, the crown will fall off of you and be up for grabs by others. The kicker? This crown does absolutely nothing, aside from grant the wearer a few extra 1,000 bonus points at the end of the level. It's more or less just there to make the wearer feel cool. The crown was included in the game to keep players on track and give them a reason to perform well in stages, despite whatever adversity they may face. And to that end, it succeeds. You might be surprised to learn just how desperately some people want this thing just for the hell of it. I've had experiences playing with friends where the instant we hop into a level, it's a free-for-all battle over the crown until somebody is able to escape the starting area with it and run through the level, which could take as long as 45 seconds. There is no Mario multiplayer experience out there quite like 3D World, and I cherish the memories I've made with my friends in this game over the years. Overall, I came away from 3D World feeling very positively. The game is exceptionally well paced, the stages are always a blast, bringing with them a unique concept or idea we've never seen before, and on top of that, you can experience the entirety of the game with a group of friends. So that's great and all, but I mentioned earlier that the game taught me something about art. It's no secret that even after the opinion renaissance this game underwent post Mario Odyssey, it has still been viewed as underwhelming when compared to that game or the likes of Mario Galaxy. And while I do agree with that to an extent, I can tell you that that thought did not once cross my mind when I was actually playing the game. 3D World may not have reinvented the wheel, but not everything has to in order to be worthwhile. I think the obsession we have with each and every work blowing the previous work out of the water is dangerous to both artists and consumers of said art. By setting our expectations too high, we are inevitably setting ourselves up for disappointment, while simultaneously creating a colossal amount of undue pressure on the artists we claim to care about. Constant exponential improvement is an unfeasible ask of anybody, and at worst, this can send the wrong message to the artist, and result in something that pleases nobody. I don't believe that artists should never step out of their comfort zones, but rather that we should be okay with the occasional disappointment, as it's simply a part of the growing process as an artist. And besides, had we jumped from Galaxy 2 straight to Odyssey, I'd have never made the memories in the multiplayer mode of 3D World I talked about. We need to be more willing to recognize the good in art that doesn't necessarily appeal to all of our tastes. I knew that I'd want to talk about 3D World on my channel at some point, but I'd held off on doing any preparation for the video because I was worried I wouldn't be saying anything of value. Lately, I've been struggling with the notion that the videos I make must have some grand purpose or contribute something new to the discourse surrounding a game. It's partially why my output has slowed over the last few months. I felt the need to constantly evolve and talk about things in a new way, but that attitude inevitably resulted in burnout. I think I'm in a better headspace now, and I can attribute that at least in part to 3D World. Sometimes, I just want to come on here and talk about a thing I like for a little bit, and that's completely valid. This isn't to say I'll stop putting in effort though. After every video I make, I'm going to take some time to reflect. What do I think worked? What didn't work? How could I improve what didn't work in the future? I hope the growth will be evident in my future work. At the very least, you can expect to see more from me soon. I'm extremely happy that I decided to discuss 3D World in this phase of my life, and what I ultimately want you to take away from this video is that sometimes, It is necessary to fail in order to succeed. There is nothing to be learned from doing nothing. And now a big thanks to the wonderful folks who have pledged to me on Patreon. Specifically, thank you to Tink, Earthquaker Oats, and PG Reviews. That's it from me. Thanks for watching.